Number 5113. Behold, a vine was before me. This signifies the intellectual part, as is evident from the signification of a vine, namely, the intellectual part in the spiritual church, of which hereafter. As the butler signifies the sensuous part subject to the intellectual, and as the influx of the intellectual into the sensuous subordinate thereto is here treated of, therefore in the dream there appeared a vine with its shoots, blossom, clusters, and grapes, by which is described influx and the rebirth of this sensuous part. As regards the intellectual part of the spiritual church, be it known that where this church is described in the Word, its intellectual part is everywhere treated of, because it is the intellectual part which in the member of this church is regenerated and becomes a church. For there are in general two churches, the celestial and the spiritual. The celestial church is in the man who can be regenerated or become a church as to the will part, and the spiritual church is in the man who, as just said, can be regenerated only as to the intellectual part. The most ancient church, which was before the flood, was celestial, because in those connected with it there was some soundness in the will part. But the ancient church, which was after the flood, was spiritual, because in those connected with it there was nothing sound in the will part, but only in the intellectual part. For this reason, where the spiritual church is treated of in the Word, its intellectual part is chiefly referred to. With those of the spiritual church, it is the intellectual part that is regenerated, as may be seen from the fact that the member of this church has no perception of truth from good, as those had who were of the celestial church. He must first learn the truth of faith and assimilate what is intellectual, and thus from truth learn what is good. And after he has thus learnt it, he is able to think it, and then to will it, and at last to do it. And then a new will is formed in him by the Lord in the intellectual part. By this new will the spiritual man is raised by the Lord into heaven, evil still remaining in the will that is proper to him. This will is then miraculously set aside, and this by a higher power, whereby he is withheld from evil and kept in good. But the member of the celestial church was regenerated as to the will part, by assimilating from infancy the good of charity. And when he had attained to a perception of this, he was led into the perception of love to the Lord, whereby all the truths of faith appeared to him in the intellect as in a mirror. The understanding and the will made in him a mind completely one, for by the things in the understanding it was perceived what was in the will. In this consisted the soundness of that first man, by whom the celestial church is signified. That a vine is the intellectual part of the spiritual church is evident from many other passages in the Word, as in Jeremiah. What hast thou to do with the way of Egypt, to drink the waters of Sihor? Or what hast thou to do with the way of Assyria, to drink the waters of the river? And yet I had planted thee a holy noble vine, a seed of truth. How then art thou turned for me into the degenerate shoots of a strange vine? This refers to Israel, by whom is signified the spiritual church. Egypt and the waters of Sihor denote external knowledges which pervert. Assyria and the waters of the river denote reasoning from these knowledges against the good of life and the truth of faith. A noble vine denotes the member of the spiritual church, who is called a vine from the intellectual part. The degenerate shoots of a strange vine denote the member of the perverted church. In Ezekiel, a riddle and a parable concerning the house of Israel. A great eagle took of the seed of the land, and placed it in a field of sowing. It budded and became a luxuriant vine of low stature, so that its shoots looked back towards him, and the roots thereof were under him. So it became a vine that made shoots, and sent forth sprigs to the eagle. This vine applied its roots and sent its shoots toward him in a good field by many waters. It was planted that it might make a branch, that it might be for a vine of magnificence. The eagle denotes the rational. The seed of the land denotes the truth of the church. Becoming a luxuriant vine and a vine of magnificence means becoming a spiritual church, which is called a vine from the wine thence produced, which signifies spiritual good or the good of charity from whence comes the truth of faith, implanted in the intellectual part. In the same. Thy mother was like a vine in thy likeness, planted by the waters, a fruitful one, and made full of branches by reason of many waters, whence she had rods of strength for the sceptre of them that bear rule. And its stature lifted itself above among the tangled boughs, and appeared in its height in the multitude of shoots. This also is said of Israel, by whom is signified the spiritual church, which is compared to a vine, for a reason like that mentioned just above. In this passage are described its derivations, even to the last, in the natural man, namely external knowledges from the senses, signified by the tangled boughs. In Hosea, I will be as the dew to Israel. His branches shall go, and his honor shall be as the olives, and his odor as Lebanon's. They that dwell in his shadow shall return. They shall vivify the corn, and flourish as the vine. His memory shall be as the wine of Lebanon. O Ephraim, what have I to do any more with idols? Israel denotes the spiritual church, whose flourishing is compared to a vine, and its memory to the wine of Lebanon, from the good of faith implanted in the intellectual part. Ephraim is the intellectual part in the spiritual church. In Zechariah, the remains of the people, the seed of peace, the vine shall give her fruit, and the earth shall give her increase, and the heavens shall give their dew. The remains of the people denote truth stored up by the Lord in the interior man. The seed of peace denotes good there, the vine the intellectual part. In Malachi, I will rebuke for you him that consumeth, that he corrupt not for you the fruit of the land, neither shall the vine be stripped for you in the field. The vine denotes the intellectual part. The vine is said not to be stripped when the intellectual part is not deprived of the truths and the goods of faith. On the other hand, it is said to be empty when there are falsities therein and consequent evils. As in Hosea, Israel is an empty vine, he maketh fruit like himself. In Moses, he shall bind his ass's colt unto the vine, and the foal of his ass unto the choice vine, after he hath washed his clothing in wine, and his covering in the blood of grapes. This is from the prophecy of Jacob, then called Israel, about his 12 sons, here about Judah, by whom is represented the Lord. The vine here denotes the intellectual part in the spiritual church, and the choice vine the intellectual part in the celestial church. In David, Jehovah, thou hast made to come forth a vine out of Egypt. Thou didst drive out the nations, and plantedst it. Thou didst cleanse before it, and didst cause its roots to be rooted, so that it filled the land. The mountains were covered with the shadow of it, and the cedars of God with the boughs. Thou hast sent forth the shoots thereof even to the sea, and the little branches thereof to the Euphrates. The boar out of the forest trampleth it, and the wild beast of the field doth devour it. The vine out of Egypt, in the supreme sense, denotes the Lord, the glorification of his human being described by the vine and its shoots. In the internal sense, the vine here is the spiritual church, and also the member of this church when made new or regenerated by the Lord as to the intellectual and will parts. The boar in the forest is the falsity, and the wild beast of the fields the evil, which destroy the church as to faith in the Lord. In the Revelation, the angel thrust his sickle into the earth, and gathered the wine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. The winepress was trodden outside the city, and there came forth blood out of the winepress even to the horses' bridles. To gather the vine of the earth means to destroy the intellectual part in the church, and because this is signified by the vine, it is also said that there came forth blood out of the winepress even to the horses' bridles, for by horses are signified intellectual things. In Isaiah, it shall come to pass in that day that every place where there were 1,000 vines for 1,000 of silver shall be for briars and brambles. Again, the inhabitants of the earth shall be burned, and man shall be left solitary. The new wine shall mourn, the vine shall languish. Again, they shall beat their breasts for the fields of unmixed wine, for the fruitful vine. Upon the land of my people come up thorn and briar. In these passages the subject is the vast station of the spiritual church as to the good and truth of faith, thus as to the intellectual part. For as before said, the truth and good of faith are in the intellectual part of the member of this church. Everyone can see that a vine here does not mean a vine, nor the earth, but that they mean something of the church. In the true sense, a vine signifies the good of the intellectual part, and a fig tree the good of the natural man, or what is the same, a vine signifies the good of the interior man, and a fig tree the good of the exterior man. And therefore a fig tree is often mentioned in the word at the same time as a vine, as in the following passages. I will surely consume them, no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree, and the leaf is fallen. Again, I will bring a nation upon you from afar, O house of Israel, which shall eat up thy vine and thy fig tree. In Hosea, I will lay waste her vine and her fig tree. In Joel, a nation is come up upon my land. It hath reduced my vine to a waste, and my fig tree to froth. It hath stripped it bare, and cast it forth. The shoots thereof are made white. The vine is withered, and the fig tree languisheth. Again, be not afraid, ye beasts of my fields, for the pastures of the wilderness are become grassy, because the tree beareth its fruit, and the fig tree and the vine shall yield their strength. In David, he smote their vine and their fig tree, and brake the tree of their border. In Habakkuk, the fig tree shall not blossom, and no produce is in the vines. In Micah, out of Zion shall go forth doctrine, and the word of Jehovah from Jerusalem. They shall sit every one under his vine and under his fig tree, and none maketh afraid. In Zechariah, in that day shall ye call every man to his fellow, under the vine and under the fig tree. In the first book of Kings, in the time of Solomon there was peace from all the passes round about, and Judah and Israel dwelt in confidence, every one under his vine and under his fig tree. That a fig tree is the good of the natural or exterior man may be seen above. That a vine is the intellectual part made new or regenerated by good from truth and by truth from good is evident from the Lord's words to the disciples after he had instituted the Holy Supper. I say to you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine until that day when I shall drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Good from truth and truth from good, by which the intellectual part is made new or man is made spiritual, are signified by the product of the vine, and the appropriation thereof is signified by drinking. That to drink is to appropriate, and that it is predicated of truth, may be seen above. That this is not done fully except in the other life is signified by the words, "Until that day when I shall drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." That the product of the vine does not mean must or wine, but something heavenly of the Lord's kingdom, is very manifest. As the intellectual part in the spiritual man is made new and regenerated by truth from the Lord alone, therefore the Lord compares himself to a vine, and those who are implanted in the truth which is from him, and consequently in him, he compares to the shoots, and the good therefrom to the fruit. In John, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine-dresser. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit he taketh away. But every branch that beareth fruit he pruneth it, that it may bear more fruit. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, so neither can ye, except ye abide in me. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same beareth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. This is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you." As in the supreme sense a vine signifies the Lord as to divine truth, and hence in the internal sense a member of the spiritual church, therefore a vineyard signifies the spiritual church itself. As the Nazarite represented the celestial man, who is regenerated through the good of love, and not through the truth of faith, like the spiritual man, and who consequently is not regenerated as to the intellectual part, but as to the will part, as may be seen above. Therefore the Nazarite was forbidden to eat anything which came forth from the vine, and thus was forbidden to drink wine. And from this also it is evident that the vine signifies the intellectual part of the spiritual man, as already shown. That the Nazarite represented the celestial man may be seen above. This also shows that it cannot possibly be known why the Nazarite was forbidden whatever came forth from the vine, not to mention many other things regarding him, unless it be known what the vine signifies in its special sense, and also unless it be known that there is a celestial church and a spiritual church, and that the member of the celestial church is regenerated in a manner different from the member of the spiritual church, the former by means of seed implanted in the will part, the latter by means of seed implanted in the intellectual part. Such are the mysteries stored up in the internal sense of the word. Number 5114. And in the vine were 3 shoots. This signifies the derivations thence even to the last, as is evident from the signification of the vine, namely the intellectual part, and from the signification of 3, namely what is complete and continuous even to the end, and from the signification of shoots, namely derivations. For as the vine is the intellectual part, the shoots are nothing but derivations thence. And as 3 signifies what is continuous even to the end, or from the first even to the last, the 3 shoots signify the derivations from the intellectual part down to the last, which is the sensuous. For the first in order is the intellectual part, and the last is the sensuous. The intellectual part in general is the sight of the internal man, which sees from the light of heaven, which is from the Lord. And all that it sees is spiritual and celestial. But the sensuous in general is of the external man, here the sense of sight, because this corresponds and is subordinate to the intellectual. This sense sees from the light of the world, which is from the sun, and all that it sees is worldly, bodily, and earthly. There are in man derivations from the intellectual part which is in the light of heaven, down to the sensuous which is in the light of the world. Unless this were so, the sensuous could not have any human life. The sensuous part of man has life not from seeing in the light of the world, for the light of the world has no life in it, but from seeing in the light of heaven, for this light has life in it. When in man this light falls upon things that are in the light of the world, it vivifies them and causes him to see objects intellectually, thus as a man. And hence by knowledge is born from things he has seen and heard in the world. Thus from things that have entered through the senses, man acquires intelligence and wisdom, and therefore has civil, moral, and spiritual life. As regards the derivations in particular, they are of such a nature in man that they cannot be briefly enumerated. They are degrees or steps as of a ladder between the intellectual part and the sensuous. But no one can understand these degrees unless he knows how they are related, namely, that they are most distinct from one another, and in such a manner that the interior can exist and subsist without the exterior, but not the exterior without the interior. For example, the spirit of man can subsist without the material body, and does actually so subsist when by death it is separated from the body. The spirit of man is in an interior degree, and the body is in an exterior degree. It is similar with the spirit of man after death. If he is among the blessed, he is in the last degree when in the first heaven, in an interior degree when in the second, and in the inmost when in the third. And when in this, he is indeed at the same time in the rest, but these are quiescent in him, almost as the bodily part in man is quiescent in sleep, but with this difference, that the interior degrees of the angels are then in the highest wakefulness. Therefore there are as many distinct degrees in man as there are heavens, besides the last, which is the body with its sensuous things. This may in some measure show how the case is with the derivations from first to last, or from the intellectual part down to the sensuous. The life of man, which is from the Lord's divine, passes through these degrees from the inmost down to the last or ultimate degree, and in each degree it is derived from what is prior, becoming more and more general, and in the ultimate degree most general. The derivations in the lower degrees are merely compositions, or rather combinations of the details and particulars of the higher degrees in succession, together with an addition from purer nature, and then from grosser nature, of such things as may serve for containing vessels. And if these vessels are decomposed, the details and particulars of the interior degrees, which had been combined therein, return to the degree next above. And as in man there is a connection with the divine, and his inmost degree is of such a nature that he can receive the divine, and not only receive it, but also make it his own by acknowledgment and affection, thus by reciprocation, he therefore can never die, because he has thus been implanted in the divine, and is therefore in what is eternal and infinite, not merely by influx thence, but also by reception of it. From this it may be seen how ignorantly and inanely those think about man who compare him to the brute animals, and believe that he will not live after death any more than they, not considering that in the brute animals there is no reception, nor through acknowledgment and affection any reciprocal appropriation of the divine, or consequent conjunction with it. And not considering that, as the state of animals is of this nature, the recipient forms of their life cannot but be dissipated, for with them the influx passes through their organic forms down into the world, and there terminates and vanishes, and never returns. Number 5115. And it was as though it budded. This signifies the influx by which rebirth is effected, as is evident from the signification of budding or producing leaves and afterwards blossoms, namely, the commencement of rebirth. It signifies influx because when man is being reborn, spiritual life flows into him, exactly as when a tree is budding, its life flows in through the heat from the sun. He who is born a man is in the word occasionally compared with objects of the vegetable kingdom, especially trees. This is because the whole vegetable kingdom, as well as the animal kingdom, represents such things as are in man, and consequently such as are in the Lord's kingdom. For man is a heaven in the least form, as was made clear at the end of the chapters concerning the correspondence of man with the grand man, or heaven. Hence also the ancients called man a microcosm, and they might also have called him a little heaven, had they known more about the state of heaven. That universal nature is a theatre representative of the Lord's kingdom may be seen above. But it is especially the man who is being born anew, that is, who is being regenerated by the Lord, who is called a heaven. For he is then implanted in the divine good and truth which are from the Lord, and consequently in heaven. For the man who is being reborn begins like a tree from seed, and therefore truth from good is signified by seed in the word. And also like a tree he produces leaves, then blossoms, and finally fruit. For he produces such things as are of intelligence, which in the word are signified by leaves, then such things as are of wisdom, which are signified by blossoms, and finally such things as are of life, that is, the goods of love and charity in act, which in the word are signified by fruits. So great is the representative similarity between the fruit-bearing tree and the man who is being regenerated, that if anything is known about spiritual good and truth, the nature of regeneration may be learned from a tree. This shows that by the vine, in this dream is representatively described the full process of the rebirth of man as to the sensuous part, which is subject to the intellectual. First by the 3 shoots, then by the budding, next by the blossoms, afterwards by the ripening of the clusters into grapes, and finally by their being pressed into Pharaoh's cup and given to him. Moreover, the dreams which flow in through heaven from the Lord never appear otherwise than according to representatives. He therefore who does not know what this or that thing in nature represents, and especially he who is quite unaware that anything is representative, cannot but believe that these representatives are merely comparisons, such as everyone uses in common speech. They indeed are comparisons, but such as correspond, and are therefore actually presented to view in the world of spirits when angels in an interior heaven are conversing about the spiritual and celestial things of the Lord's kingdom. In regard to dreams, see Numbers. Number 5116. Its blossom went up. This signifies the state approaching regeneration, as is evident from the signification of the blossom that bursts from the tree before the fruit, namely the state before regeneration. As just said, the budding and fruiting of a tree represent the rebirth of man. Its becoming green with leaves represents the first state, the blossoming the second, which is the next before regeneration, and the fruiting the third, which is the very state of the regenerate. This is why leaves signify the things of intelligence, or the truths of faith, for these are the first things of the rebirth or regeneration, while blossoms signify the things of wisdom, or the goods of faith, because these immediately precede the rebirth or regeneration. And fruits signify the things of life, or the works of charity, because these follow and constitute the very state of the regenerate. Such things exist in the vegetable kingdom because of the influx of the spiritual world. This, however, cannot be believed by those who attribute all things to nature, and nothing to the divine. Whereas they who attribute all things to the divine, and nothing to nature, are permitted to see not only that everything is from the divine, but also that everything has a correspondence, and is therefore representative. And finally, they are permitted to see that universal nature is a theatre, representative of the Lord's kingdom. Thus that the divine is in every particular of nature, insomuch that nature is a representation of the eternal and the infinite, of the eternal from propagation even to eternity, of the infinite from the multiplication of seeds to infinity. Such impulses could never have existed in everything of the vegetable kingdom unless the divine continually flowed in. For from influx comes impulse, from impulse energy, and from energy effect. They who attribute all things to nature say that such impulses were imparted to fruits and seeds at their first creation, and that from the energy thence received they are afterwards impelled of themselves to such activities. But they do not consider that subsistence is perpetual existence, or what is similar, that propagation is perpetual creation. Neither do they consider that the effect is the continuation of the cause, and that when the cause ceases, the effect also ceases, and consequently that without a continual influx of the cause, every effect instantly perishes. Nor do they consider that what is unconnected with the first cause of all things, consequently with the divine, is instantly annihilated, because the prior must be continually in the posterior in order that the posterior may exist. If they who attribute all things to nature and little or nothing to the divine considered these things, they too might acknowledge that each and all things in nature represent such things as are in the spiritual world. Consequently, such as are in the Lord's kingdom, where the divine of the Lord is most closely represented. For this reason, influx is said to be from the spiritual world. But the meaning is that influx is through the spiritual world from the Lord's divine. The reason why natural men do not consider these things is that they are not willing to acknowledge them, for they are in earthly and bodily things, and hence in a life of the love of self and of the world, and therefore are in inverted order relatively to the things of the spiritual world or of heaven. And from an inverted state it is impossible to see such things. For they see the things below as if they were above, and the things above as if they were below. And therefore when in the other life such persons are seen in the light of heaven, they appear head downwards and feet upwards. Who among them, when he sees trees and other plants and blossoms, considers that this is as it were their gladness, because they are now producing fruits or seeds? They see that blossoms come first, and that they last until they have in their midst the beginnings of the fruit or seed, and thereby convey into these their sap. And if they knew anything about the rebirth or regeneration of man, or rather if they desired to know, they would from this likeness see in the flowers a representative of the state of man before regeneration, namely, that man then blossoms in like manner from the good of intelligence and wisdom, that is, in interior gladness and beauty, because he is then striving to implant in life the goods of intelligence and wisdom, that is, to produce fruits. That this state is such cannot possibly be known, because the nature of the interior gladness and beauty thus represented is utterly unknown to those who live solely in the pleasures of the love of the world and the delights of the love of self. These pleasures and delights cause the former to appear to such persons so utterly unpleasant and undelightful that they hold them in aversion, and consequently they reject them as trivial or of no value. and therefore deny them, and at the same time deny that the spiritual and the celestial is anything. From this comes the insanity of the present age, which is held to be wisdom. Number 5117. And the clusters thereof ripened into grapes. This signifies the conjunction of spiritual truth with celestial good, as is evident from the signification of ripening, namely the progress of rebirth or regeneration, even to the conjunction of truth with good, and thus conjunction. And from the signification of clusters, namely the truth of spiritual good, and from the signification of grapes, namely the good of celestial truth. Here both of these in that sensuous part which is represented by the butler. The conjunction of these in the sensuous part is similar to the ripening of clusters into grapes. For in rebirth or regeneration, all truth tends to conjunction with good, truth not having received life previously to such conjunction, consequently not having been made fruitful. This is represented in the fruits of trees when they are ripening. In unripe fruits, which here are the clusters, is represented the state when truth still predominates. But in the ripe fruits, which are the grapes, is represented the state when good has the predominance of good being represented also in the flavor and sweetness, which are perceived in ripe grapes. But concerning the conjunction of truth with good in the sensuous part, which is subject to the intellectual, further particulars cannot be given, for they are mysteries too deep for apprehension, necessitating previous knowledges about the state of the celestial of the spiritual, and about this sensuous part, and also about the state of the natural in which this conjunction is manifested. That grapes signify the good of the spiritual man, thus charity, is evident from many passages in the Word, as in Isaiah. My well-beloved had a vineyard in a horn of the son of oil. He looked that it should bring forth grapes, and it brought forth wild grapes. Here a vineyard denotes the spiritual church. His looking that it should bring forth grapes denotes the goods of charity, and its bringing forth wild grapes, the evils of hatred and revenge. Again, thus hath said Jehovah, as the new wine is found in the cluster, and one saith, Destroy it not, for a blessing is in it. The new wine in the cluster denotes truth from good in the natural. In Jeremiah, I will surely gather them, saith Jehovah, no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree. There being no grapes on the vine denotes that there is no interior or rational good, and no figs on the fig tree, that there is no exterior or natural good. For a vine is the intellectual part, and when truth and good are conjoined therein, a vine is the rational, for the rational is thence derived. That a fig tree is the good of the natural or exterior man may be seen above. In Hosea, I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first ripe on the fig tree in its beginning. Grapes in the wilderness denote rational good not yet made spiritual. The first ripe on the fig tree denotes natural good in like manner. Israel denotes the ancient spiritual church in its beginning. Fathers in this and other passages not being the sons of Jacob, but those with whom the ancient church was first established. In Micah, there is no cluster to eat, my soul desired the first ripe. The holy man is perished out of the earth, and there is none upright among men. The cluster to eat denotes the good of charity in its beginning, the first ripe, the truth of faith also at that time. In Amos, behold, the days come when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him that scattereth the seed. And the mountains shall drop new wine, and all the hills shall melt. And I will bring back the captivity of my people, and they shall build the waste cities, and inhabit them, and shall settle and plant vineyards, and drink the wine thereof. And they shall gather clusters, and eat the fruit of them. This treats of the establishment of a spiritual church, which is thus described: the conjunction of spiritual good with its truth by the plowman reaching the reaper, and the conjunction of spiritual truth with its good by the treader of grapes overtaking him that scattereth the seed. The goods of love and charity therefrom are signified by the mountains dropping new wine and the hills melting. Bringing back the captivity of the people denotes deliverance from falsities. Building the waste cities denotes rectifying the falsified doctrinals of truth. Inhabiting them and planting vineyards denotes cultivating the things of the spiritual church. Drinking the wine thereof, appropriating the truths of charity proper to that church. And gathering clusters and eating the fruit of them, appropriating the goods thence derived. Everyone can see that building cities, planting vineyards, drinking wine, gathering clusters, and eating the fruit of them are merely natural things, in which there would be nothing divine unless they contained a spiritual sense. In Moses, he hath washed his clothing in wine, and his covering in the blood of grapes. These words are spoken of the Lord. Wine denotes spiritual good from the divine love, the blood of grapes, celestial good therefrom. Again, butter of the herd, and milk of the flock, with the fat of lambs and of rams, of the breed of Bashan, and of he-goats, with the fat of kidneys of wheat, and the blood of the grape thou drinkest unmixed. This is said of the ancient church, whose goods of love and charity are thus described, each expression signifying some specific good. The blood of the grape means spiritual celestial good, the divine in heaven proceeding from the Lord being so called. Wine is called the blood of grapes, because both expressions signify holy truth proceeding from the Lord. But wine is predicated of the spiritual church, and blood of the celestial church, and for this reason wine was enjoined in the Holy Supper. Again, their vine is of the vine of Sodom, and of the fields of Gomorrah. The grapes thereof are grapes of gall. They have clusters of bitternesses. This is spoken of the Jewish church. Their vine, being of the vine of Sodom and of the fields of Gomorrah, denotes the intellectual part beset by falsities from infernal love. The grapes thereof, grapes of gall, and their having clusters of bitternesses, denotes that it was similar with the will part therein. For as in a good sense a grape signifies charity, it is predicated of the will part, but of the will part within the intellectual. And similarly in the opposite sense, because all truth is of the understanding, and all good is of the will. In the Revelation, the angel said, Put forth thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. To gather the clusters of the earth denotes to destroy all things of charity. In Matthew, By their fruits ye shall know them. Do they gather grapes of thorns, or figs of thistles? And in Luke, Every tree is known by its own fruit. For of thorns they do not gather figs, nor of a bramble bush do they gather the grape. As charity toward the neighbor is the subject of these passages, it is said that they should be known by their fruits, which are the goods of charity, the internal goods of charity being grapes, and the external figs. The following law was enacted in the Jewish church. When thou comest into thy companion's vineyard, then thou mayest eat grapes according to thy mind, to thy fill, but thou shalt not put any in thy vessel. This involves that every one associating with others of a different doctrine and religion may learn and accept their goods of charity, but may not assimilate them and conjoin them with his own truths. A vineyard denotes the church, that is, wherever there is doctrine or religion. Grapes are the goods of charity, and a vessel is the truth of the church. Number 5118. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. This signifies the influx of the interior natural into the exterior, and the beginning of reception, as is evident from the representation of Pharaoh, namely, the interior natural, and from the representation of the butler, namely, the exterior natural. In my hand, meaning with him, and from the signification of a cup, namely, that which contains, and also at the same time that which is contained. Hence, and from the context in the internal sense, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand signifies the influx of the interior natural into the exterior, and the beginning of reception therein. What the interior natural is and what the exterior has been stated above, namely that the interior natural is that which communicates with the rational, and into which the rational flows, and the exterior natural is that which communicates with the senses or through them with the world, thus into which the world flows. As regards influx, it is continuous from the Lord through the rational into the interior natural, and through this into the exterior. But what flows in is changed and modified according to reception. With the unregenerate, goods are there turned into evils, and truths into falsities. But with the regenerate, goods and truths are there presented as in a mirror. For the natural is exactly like a face representative of the spiritual things of the internal man, and this face becomes representative when the exteriors correspond to the interiors. This shows to some extent what is meant by the influx of the interior natural into the exterior, and by the beginning of reception therein. Number 5119. And I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup. This signifies reciprocal influx into the goods from a spiritual origin there, as is evident from the signification of grapes, namely the goods of charity, thus goods from a spiritual origin. For all the goods of genuine charity are from this source. And from the signification of pressing into Pharaoh's cup, namely reciprocal influx. Reciprocal influx does not mean that the exterior natural flows into the interior, because this is impossible. For exterior things cannot possibly flow into interior things, or what is the same thing, lower or posterior things cannot flow into higher and prior ones. But the rational calls forth the things in the interior natural, and thereby the things in the exterior. Not that the things themselves therein are called forth, but that which has been deduced, or as it were extracted from them. Such is the nature of reciprocal influx. It appears as if the things of the world flow in through the senses towards the interiors, but this is a fallacy of sense. The influx is of interiors into exteriors, and the result of this influx is perception. On these subjects I have at times conversed with spirits, and it was demonstrated by living experience that the interior man sees and perceives in the exterior what is done outside him, and that from no other source has the sensuous life, or the faculty of sense or sensation. But this fallacy is of such a nature and so great that it can by no means be dispelled by the natural man, and not even by the rational, unless he can withdraw his thought from the sensuous. These things are said to show what reciprocal influx is. Number 5120. And I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. This signifies appropriation by the interior natural, as is evident from the signification of giving the cup, thus wine to drink, namely appropriation. That drinking is the appropriation of truth may be seen above. And from the representation of Pharaoh, namely the interior natural. As is evident from what goes before, the subject here is the regeneration of that sensuous part which is subject to the intellectual part of the interior man, which sensuous part is signified by the butler, and consequently the influx of truth and good and their reception into the exterior natural. But as these things are far removed from the apprehension of those who have no distinct idea about the rational and the natural, or about influx, no further explanation is given. Moreover, a cup is often mentioned in the word, and by it, in the true sense, is signified spiritual truth, that is, the truth of faith which is from the good of charity. The same is signified by wine, and in the opposite sense is signified the falsity by which comes evil, and also falsity from evil. A cup signifies the same as wine, because a cup is what contains, and wine is what is contained, and hence they constitute one thing, and therefore the one is meant by the other. That such is the signification of cup in the word is plain from the following passages. Jehovah, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. To prepare a table and to anoint the head with oil denotes being gifted with the good of charity and love. My cup runneth over denotes that the natural is thence filled with spiritual truth and good. Again, what shall I render unto Jehovah? I will take the cup of salvation and call upon the name of Jehovah. To take the cup of salvation denotes the appropriation of the good of faith. In Mark, whosoever shall give you a cup of water to drink in my name, because ye are Christ's, verily I say unto you, he shall not lose his reward. To give a cup of water to drink in my name denotes instructing in the truths of faith from a little charity. In Matthew, presently, taking the cup and giving thanks, he gave to them, saying, Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the new covenant. The cup and not the wine is mentioned because wine is predicated of the spiritual church, but blood of the celestial church, although both of these signify holy truth proceeding from the Lord. But in the spiritual church, the holy of faith from charity to the neighbor, and in the celestial church, the holy of charity from love to the Lord. The spiritual church is distinguished from the celestial in this, that the former is in charity to the neighbor, while the latter is in love to the Lord. And the Holy Supper was instituted to represent and signify the Lord's love to the whole human race, and the reciprocal love of man to him. As by cup was signified that which contained, and by wine that which was contained, consequently by cup man's external, and by wine his internal. Therefore the Lord said, Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye cleanse the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first the inside of the cup and of the platter, and the outside will also become clean. By a cup here also is meant in the internal sense the truth of faith, to cultivate which without its good is to cleanse the outside of the cup, especially when the interiors are full of hypocrisy, deceit, hatred, revenge, and cruelty. For then the truth of faith is only in the external man, and nothing at all of it is in the internal. And to cultivate and assimilate the good of faith causes truths to be conjoined with good in the interior man, in which case even fallacies are accepted as truths, as is signified by cleanse first the inside of the cup, and the outside will also become clean. Likewise in Mark, many other things there are which the Pharisees and the Jews have received to hold, as the washing of cups and pots, brazen vessels and couches. Forsaking the commandment of God, ye hold the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cups, and many other like things ye do. Ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition. That by cup is signified in the opposite sense that falsity from which is evil, and also the falsity which is from evil, is evident from the following passages. Thus hath said Jehovah the God of Israel unto me, Take this cup of wine of anger from my hand, and cause all the nations to whom I send thee to drink it. And they shall drink and reel to and fro, and be mad, because of the sword that I will send among them. Therefore I took the cup from Jehovah's hand, and made all the nations to drink, unto whom Jehovah had sent me. The cup of wine of anger denotes the falsity through which comes evil. The reason why the falsity through which comes evil is signified is that as wine intoxicates and makes insane, so does falsity, spiritual intoxication being nothing but insanity brought on by reasonings about what should be believed, when nothing is believed that is not apprehended. Hence come falsities, and from falsities evils. And therefore it is said that they shall drink and reel to and fro, and be mad, because of the sword that I will send. The sword is falsity fighting against truth. In the book of Lamentations, Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest in the land of Uz. The cup shall pass through unto thee also. Thou shalt be drunken, and shalt be uncovered. To be drunken from the cup denotes to be insane from falsities, and to be uncovered or naked without shame, the evil thence derived. In Ezekiel, Thou hast walked in the way of thy sister, therefore I will give her cup into thy hand. Thus hath said the Lord Jehovah, Thou shalt drink of thy sister's cup which is deep and wide. Thou shalt be for laughter and mockery, big to contain. Thou shalt be filled with drunkenness and sorrow, with the cup of devastation and desolation. The cup of thy sister Samaria thou shalt both drink and drain, and thou shalt gnaw the potsherds thereof. This is said of Jerusalem, by which is signified what is spiritual of the celestial church. Cup here denotes falsity from evil, and because this vastates or destroys the church, it is called the cup of devastation and desolation. In Isaiah, Awake, awake, arise, O Jerusalem, who hast drunk from the hand of Jehovah the cup of his anger. Thou hast drunken the dregs of the cup of trembling. In Habakkuk, Drink thou also, that thy foreskin be uncovered. The cup of Jehovah's right hand shall come round unto thee, that shameful vomit be upon thy glory. In David, In the hand of Jehovah there is a cup, and he hath mixed with wine, he hath filled with the mixture, and hath poured out therefrom. But the dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth, shall suck them out, and drink them. In these passages also a cup denotes insanity from falsities and the evils thence derived. It is called the cup of the anger of Jehovah, and also of the right hand of Jehovah, because the Jewish nation, like the common people, believed evils and the punishment of evils and falsities to come from no other source than Jehovah, although they are from the man himself, and from the infernal crew with him. Such language is often employed due to the appearance and the belief this induces. But the internal sense teaches how it should be understood, and what should be believed, as may be seen above. As a cup, like wine, signifies in the opposite sense the falsities through which come evils, and also falsities from evils, a cup signifies temptation also, because this occurs when falsity fights against truth, and consequently evil against good. A cup is used to express and describe temptation in the following passage. Jesus prayed, saying, If thou wilt, let this cup pass from me. nevertheless not my will, but thine be done. The cup here denotes temptation. Likewise in John. Jesus said to Peter, Put up thy sword into the sheath. The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it? And also in Mark. Jesus said to James and John, Ye know not what ye ask. Can ye drink of the cup that I drink of, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? And they said, We can. But Jesus said to them, Ye shall indeed drink of the cup that I drink of, and with the baptism that I am baptized with shall ye be baptized. From this it is evident that a cup is temptation, because temptation arises through evils fighting by means of falsities against goods and truths. For baptism signifies regeneration, and because this is effected by means of spiritual combats, therefore baptism at the same time signifies temptation. In the directly opposite sense, a cup signifies falsity from evil with those who are profane, that is, who inwardly are in what is contrary to charity, and outwardly counterfeit holiness. In this sense it is used in Jeremiah. Babylon hath been a golden cup in Jehovah's hand, making the whole earth drunken. All nations have drunk of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Babylon denotes those who are in external sanctity and inwardly in profanation. The falsity which they veil over with sanctity is the golden cup. Making the whole earth drunken denotes that they lead those of the church, which is meant by the earth, into errors and insanities. The profanities which they hide under external sanctity consist in striving after nothing but to be the greatest and wealthiest of all, and to be worshipped as gods, possessors of heaven and earth, having dominion thus over the souls and bodies of men, and this by means of the divine and holy things of which they make pretense. Hence, as to the external man, they appear like angels, but as to the internal, they are devils. The like is said of Babylon in the Revelation. The woman was arrayed in crimson and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stone and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her whoredom. Again, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become a habitation of demons. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the fury of her whoredom, and the kings of the earth have committed whoredom with her. I heard a voice from heaven saying, Render unto her as she rendered unto you. In the cup which she mingled, mingle to her double. Again, the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Remembrance of Babylon the great was made before God, to give to her the cup of the fury of God's anger. Again, the 3rd angel said with a great voice, If any one worship the beast and his image, he shall drink of the wine of God's anger, prepared unmixed in the cup of his anger, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone. Number 5121. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. This signifies revelation from perception from the celestial in the natural as to what it had in itself, as is evident from the signification of saying in the historic parts of the word, namely, perception. Here, revelation from perception, because said of a dream and its interpretation. All revelation being either from speech with angels through whom the Lord speaks, or from perception, of which hereafter. And from the representation of Joseph, namely, the celestial in the natural. And from the signification of interpretation, namely, what it had in itself. From this it is plain that by Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it, is signified revelation from perception from the celestial in the natural as to what it had in itself. In regard to revelations being either from perception or from speech with angels through whom the Lord speaks, it should be known that they who are in good and thence in truth, and especially they who are in the good of love to the Lord, have revelation from perception, whereas they who are not in good and thence in truth can indeed have revelations, yet not from perception, but through a living voice heard within them, and thus through angels from the Lord. This revelation is external, but the former is internal. The angels, especially the celestial, have revelation from perception, as also had the men of the most ancient church, and some too of the ancient church, but scarcely anyone at this day. Whereas very many, even those who have not been in good, have had revelations from speech without perception, and also by means of visions or dreams. Such were most of the revelations of the prophets in the Jewish church. They heard a voice, they saw a vision, and they dreamed a dream. But as they had no perception, these were merely verbal or visual revelations without any perception of what they signified. For true perception comes through heaven from the Lord, and affects the intellect spiritually, and leads it perceptibly to think as the matter really is, and induces internal assent, although the source of this is unknown. It supposes that this is in itself, and that assent flows from the connection of things, whereas it is a dictate through heaven from the Lord, flowing into the interiors of the thought, about such things as transcend the natural and sensuous, that is, the things of the spiritual world or of heaven. From what has now been said it may be seen what revelation from perception is. But the revelation from perception which the Lord had, who is here represented by Joseph, and which revelation is here treated of in the internal sense, was from the divine in himself, thus was from himself. Number 5122. The 3 shoots are 3 days. This signifies continuous derivations down to the last or ultimate one, as is evident from the signification of 3, namely 1 period and its continuation from beginning to end. From the signification of shoots, namely derivations, and from the signification of days, namely states. From this it follows that by the 3 shoots or 3 days is signified the state of the rebirth of the sensuous part which is represented by the butler, from its first down to its ultimate, its successive derivations being signified by the shoots. The states of the rebirth of each sensuous part and of each thing in the natural and also in the rational have their progressions from beginning to end, and when they come to the end they commence from a kind of a new beginning, that is, from the end to which they had striven in the former state to a further end, and so on. And at last the order is inverted, and then what was last becomes first, just as while man is being regenerated both as to the rational and as to the natural, the periods of the first state are from the truths which are of faith to the goods which are of charity. And then the truths of faith apparently act the first part, and the goods of charity the second. For the truths of faith regard the good of charity as their end. These periods continue even until the man has been regenerated. Afterwards, charity, which was the end, becomes the beginning, and from it new states commence, which proceed in both directions, namely, towards what is still more interior, namely, love to the Lord, and also towards what is exterior, namely, the truths of faith, and further toward natural and also sensuous truths, which are then successively reduced to correspondence with the goods of charity and of love in the rational, and thus into heavenly order. These are what are meant by continuous progressions and derivations down to the ultimate one. Such progressions and derivations with the man who is being regenerated are perpetual, from his infancy even to the last hour of his life in the world, and also afterwards to eternity. And yet he can never be so regenerated that he can in any way be called perfect. For there are innumerable, nay, illimitable things to be regenerated both in the rational and in the natural, and every one of them has an illimitable number of shoots, that is, progressions and derivations toward interior and exterior things. Man knows nothing at all of this, but the Lord knows each and everything, and provides for them at every moment. If he were to pause even for an instant, all the progressions would be confused, for what is prior looks to what follows in a continuous series, and produces series of consequences to eternity. From this it is plain that the divine foresight and providence are in every smallest particular, and that unless this were so, or if providence were only universal, the human race would perish. Number 5123. In yet 3 days. This signifies that there would then be a new state, as is evident from the signification of 3, namely, what is continuous even to the end, thus what is complete, and from the signification of days, namely, states. From this it is plain that 3 days signify a complete state. Consequently, in 3 days or after 3 days denotes a new state, for after a complete state, a new one begins. Number 5124. Shall Pharaoh lift up thy head? This signifies what is provided, and therefore what is concluded, as is evident from the signification of lifting up the head, namely, concluding, and in the supreme sense, providing. For the divine conclusion and execution of a thing concluded is providence. To lift up the head was a customary form of passing sentence among the ancients, when the bound or those in prison were granted their life or condemned to death. In the former case, this was expressed by lifting up the head, as in the 2nd book of Kings. Evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he was made king, did lift up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, out of the prison house, and spake good to him, and set his throne above the thrones of the kings that were with him in Babylon. So in Jeremiah. Evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the 1st year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, and brought him forth out of the prison house. But when they were condemned to death, this was expressed by lifting up the head from off him, as in what follows concerning the baker. Within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee. This form of sentence had its origin among the ancients who were in representatives, from the representation of those who were bound in prison or in a pit, and as these represented those who were in vastation under the lower earth, therefore by lifting up their head was signified their liberation. For they are then elevated or raised up out of vastation to the heavenly communities. To be lifted up or to be elevated is to advance towards interior things, for what is elevated or high is predicated of these, and being towards interior things, it is towards heaven, for heaven is in the interior things. This was signified by lifting up the head. But lifting the head from off anyone signified condemnation to death, because then those who were above those in the pit or in vastation were raised to heaven, while the others were sent down to lower depths. Because of this signification, therefore, this form of sentence was adopted in the word. It is therefore plain that lifting up the head signified what is concluded, and therefore in the supreme sense what is provided. For what the divine concludes, this it provides. Number 5125. And shall restore thee to thy place. This signifies that the things of the sensuous part subject to the intellectual would be reduced to order, that they might be in the last place, as is evident from the representation of the butler, of whom these things are said, namely the sensuous part subject to the intellectual. Consequently, the things of this sensuous part in the external natural. For the sensuous itself is not reduced to order, but only those things which have thereby entered man's fantasy. And from the signification of restoring to thy place, namely reducing to order. And because sensuous things, that is, those which have entered from the world through the external organs of sensation, are in the last place, and there minister and are subservient to interior things, therefore these also are signified. Moreover, with the regenerate these sensuous things are in the last place, but with the unregenerate in the first place. Whether sensuous things are in the first or last place can easily be seen by man if he pays attention. If he sanctions everything to which the sensuous prompts or which it craves, and disapproves of everything that the intellectual part dictates, then sensuous things are in the first place, and the man is carried away by his appetites, and is wholly sensuous. Such a man is but little removed from the condition of irrational animals, for they are carried away in like manner. Nay, he is in a worse condition if he abuses the intellectual or rational faculty to confirm the evils and falsities to which sensuous things prompt and which they crave. But if he does not sanction them, but from within sees how they stray into falsities and incite to evils, and strives to chasten them and thus reduce them to obedience, that is, subject them to the intellectual and will parts which are of the interior man, then sensuous things are reduced to order, that they may be in the last place. When sensuous things are in the last place, a happy and blessed feeling flows from the interior man into the delights of the senses, and increases them 1,000-fold. The sensuous man disbelieves this, because he does not understand it, and as he is sensible of no other than sensuous delight, and thinks there is no higher delight, he regards as of no account the happy and blessed feeling within the delights of the senses. For whatever is unknown to anyone is believed to be non-existent.